There was a time when the name Evelyn
Almost there,
Barrett
Shiloh.
meant something in this town. Folks used to call her the Mustang Queen of Texas, and for years she wore the title with a quiet pride. But on this gray morning, standing in the shadow of the old livestock auction barn, Eve felt more ghost than queen. The whispers started as soon as she stepped out of her battered pickup truck, boots hitting the dirt with a stubborn thud, her hat pulled low to shield tired eyes from the world. She kept to herself, slipping past men in worn jeans and women with sharp eyes, all of them out for a bargain or a show. Eve had come for neither. She moved like someone with a purpose, but each step felt heavier than the last. The crowd parted just enough for her to see the lineup of horses, most of them resigned, some wild-eyed, all of them uncertain about the hands their fate would soon fall into. But it was the Mustang at the end of the line that caught her. A battered, dun-colored gelding, ribs showing, his mane tangled and full of burrs, one ear half torn. He stood with his head low, body marked by old scars and fresh cuts, flies buzzing around his legs. Someone had called him Shiloh, though she suspected he had never known much peace. When their eyes met, something passed between them. Pain, yes, but also a flicker of defiance, like a spark in the ashes. The auctioneer's voice cracked over the loudspeaker, slicing through murmurs and jokes. "Next up, lot 37, a Mustang from Silver Rock Ranch. Not much to look at, but he'll make cheap dog food if nothing else. Who'll start us off?" There was laughter, cruel and sharp, and a few men jeered. Someone yelled, "Bet he bucks like hell. You want a hospital bill, go ahead and bid." Eve felt her cheeks burn, but she held her ground. She had seen too many horses broken by hands that only knew how to take. The bidding started low, $10, $15. A man in a grease-stained cap called out $25, smirking as he winked at his buddies. Eve heard one woman mutter, "Why's she even here? Thought she gave up on horses." Another voice whispered, "She's just crazy, living out there alone." Eve's jaw tightened. She raised her hand, 30. The auctioneer glanced at her, surprised. $30 from the lady in the back. Do I hear 35? A pause. The man in the cap grinned and shouted, 40. Let's see how far the old gal goes. 50, Eve replied, her voice clear, unwavering. Murmurs rippled. No one else bid. The auctioneer hammered it down with a shrug. Sold! To the Mustang Queen herself. Eve walked to the pen as the crowd parted, some sneering, others just curious to see if she'd even managed to get the broken Mustang out of the yard. She kept her gaze steady, refusing to let the weight of their scorn touch her. It wasn't the first time she'd stood alone against a crowd. Probably wouldn't be the last. Inside the pen, Shiloh flinched at her approach. Eve moved slow, gentle hands, her voice a whisper just for him. "Easy, boy. You're safe now. At least, safer than you were." She saw the way he trembled, not just from pain, but from remembering every time a human hand meant something bad. With patience born from years and hard lessons, she eased the rope around his neck, ignoring the mutters and laughter behind her. But when she tried to lead Shiloh out of the pen, his legs buckled. For a heartbeat, Eve thought he might rally. Instead, the Mustang collapsed, chest hitting the dirt, eyes wild with panic and exhaustion. The crowd erupted, laughter ringing out cruel and loud. "That's what you get. Hope you kept the receipt, Mustang Queen." Eve's heart pounded. She dropped to her knees in the dust beside Shiloh, shielding him from jeers and thrown pebbles. "Come on, boy," she murmured, voice cracking. "I know you're tired. I know you've got nothing left. But you're not alone this time, not while I'm still standing." A teenage boy from the crowd tossed a half-rotten apple at her, missing by inches. Eve ignored it. She pressed her palm to Shiloh's neck, feeling his heartbeat flutter, thin like a moth's wing. The auctioneer tried to wave her off. "He's done for, lady. Get up, save yourself the trouble." "No," Eve said, loud enough to cut through the noise. "I won't." For a moment, the crowd fell silent. The stubbornness in her tone was a dare. Slowly, Eve coaxed Shiloh, talking nonsense and memories, willing him to hear something worth living for. Minutes passed, the laughter fading into awkward silence. Finally, with one last desperate effort, Shiloh staggered to his feet. The crowd didn't cheer. They just watched, uncertain, as the battered Mustang and the broken woman limped toward the exit, defiant in their weakness. As Eve led Shiloh out of the auction yard, a hard rain began to fall, washing dust and blood into the earth. She didn't look back. The storm rolled in just as Eve Barrett coaxed Shiloh up the sagging drive to her ranch. Lightning forked above the black hills, thunder rumbling so hard it seemed to shake the bones of the earth. Eve kept her hands steady on Shiloh's lead rope, murmuring to him between gusts of wind, both of them squinting against sheets of cold rain. The Mustang Queen's domain wasn't much these days, just a run-down house and a few half-broken fences, the paint peeling, shutters flapping, ghosts in every room. Eve half-dragged, half-guided Shiloh into the old barn, slamming the heavy door behind them as rain hammered the tin roof. The Mustang shivered so hard Eve thought he might collapse again, but she held him upright, bracing her shoulder against his side. "Easy," she whispered, her breath showing in the barn's chill air. "You're home now. We start over from here." Inside, the barn was full of old memories, broken tack, a battered saddle, faded ribbons, and a photograph of a much younger Eve beside a bright-eyed girl with copper hair, Lily. The sight of it stung, but Eve shook her head, pushing the ache away. She needed to focus. First, she gathered clean hay for bedding and fetched warm water from the kitchen, her boots squelching mud across cracked linoleum. As she worked, lightning flickered outside, illuminating shadows in the corners. Every so often, Eve would pause to check Shiloh's breathing, watching for any sign that he was slipping away. She knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she cleaned his wounds. Some were old, scars that told stories of wire and whips, nights without shelter. Others were fresh and angry, evidence of the neglect he'd suffered at Silver Rock Ranch. Eve spoke softly, voice barely louder than the rain. "You're not the first Mustang I've patched up in the dark," she said, "but you might be the one I needed most." At times, Shiloh would jerk away, eye rolling in fear. Eve waited him out, never grabbing, never forcing. She knew trust didn't come cheap. By midnight, she'd washed the worst of the grime away, applied ointment, and wrapped what wounds she could. Her arms ached, her back throbbed. Still, she kept going. She set out a bucket of oats, watching as Shiloh ignored it. "You'll eat when you're ready," she said, though worry gnawed at her. Sometimes a horse just gives up. She'd seen it before. A deep chill settled in as the wind howled through the cracks in the barn. Eve bundled herself in an old blanket and settled on a straw bale beside Shiloh, refusing to leave his side. Rain rattled the roof, the world shrinking to the sound of her own breathing and the Mustang's labored sighs. As the hours crawled by, memories returned, unbidden and sharp. She saw Lily's face, older now than the little girl in the photograph, eyes bright with anger the last time they spoke. "I needed you, Mom, but you always chose your damn horses." The accusation haunted Eve, even as she tried to believe she'd done the best she could. Loss sat heavy in her chest, an ache that wouldn't leave. She pulled a battered notebook from her coat and fumbled for a pen. By lantern light, she began to write. "Dear Lily, tonight I brought home a Mustang the world had given up on. Maybe that's all I know how to do, try to save things that are broken. I'm sorry for all the times I didn't save you, or us. I hope someday you'll understand why I'm still fighting. For you, for me, for Shiloh. Love, Mom." She tore out the page, folded it, and placed it in an envelope with Lily's name. Eve set it on the kitchen table, hoping that tomorrow she'd find the courage to mail it. Back in the barn, Shiloh trembled on his feet. Eve rose, joints stiff, and wrapped another blanket around his body, murmuring encouragements she barely believed herself. "You're stronger than they know. Don't quit on me now." As the storm outside reached its peak, Eve heard a crashing sound. The old willow by the fence line had split, the crack echoing through the night. The barn shuddered, and Shiloh startled, nearly bolting. Eve pressed her palm to his neck, heart pounding. "Stay with me, boy, please." The rain kept falling. An hour passed, then 2. Eve felt herself drifting, exhaustion tugging her under, but she forced herself awake each time Shiloh shifted or groaned. At one point, his knees buckled and he almost collapsed. Eve caught him, arms around his battered neck. "No, Shiloh, don't you dare give up on me now. Not when we just started." He stood, somehow, sides heaving. Eve stroked his mane, her own tears lost in the storm. The air inside the barn grew close, thick with the smell of wet hay, sweat, and hope. Fragile, stubborn hope. Dawn crept in, a pale blue glow at the edges of the storm. Eve blinked, unsure if she'd slept at all. Shiloh was still standing, watching her with wary, tired eyes. She managed a weak smile. "We made it, old man. First night's always the hardest." Her hands shook as she fumbled for her phone. She snapped a picture of Shiloh, battered but unbroken, and attached it to another letter for Lily, a silent plea. "Look what I saved. Maybe, someday, we can save each other." Outside, the storm faded, leaving the world scrubbed clean but scarred. Inside the barn, Eve sank down beside Shiloh, both of them battered, both refusing to let go. As the sun climbed above the broken fences, hope flickered, a tiny, stubborn flame. The world seemed quieter after the storm. Soft morning sun filtered through ragged clouds, spilling gold across the battered ranch. Eve Barrett stood in the doorway of her old barn, boots planted in fresh mud, watching as Shiloh sniffed tentatively at the hay. He looked rough, flanks still gaunt, patches of hair missing, old wounds crisscrossing his coat. But the wild terror in his eyes had faded, replaced by something softer, uncertain. Eve had seen enough Mustangs to know trust didn't come overnight. Some horses never gave it at all. But there was something different about Shiloh, something in the way he watched her with wary interest instead of panic. That morning, as she leaned against the stall and offered a half-rotten apple in her palm, she braced herself for another rejection. To her surprise, Shiloh stepped closer, nostrils flaring, ears flicking forward. His muzzle brushed her fingers, and for a heartbeat, Eve forgot her aches and regrets. She held perfectly still, afraid to spook him. The Mustang hesitated, then took the apple, crunching it with deliberate slowness, watching her the whole time. Eve let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "That's it," she murmured. "Little steps, big fella. We're in no rush." The days blurred together in a quiet rhythm. Mornings began with gentle words and careful hands, cleaning wounds, brushing out tangles, changing water and hay. Shiloh learned to tolerate her touch, sometimes even leaning into her palm for a moment before pulling away. Each small victory felt enormous. At night, when the ranch grew still and the distant coyotes sang, Eve found herself drifting back through memories she'd spent years trying to forget. She remembered the feel of Lily's small hand in hers, both of them laughing as they chased wild foals through spring grass. She remembered the day Lily rode her first Mustang, face split in a grin, copper hair flying behind her in the Texas wind. Eve missed her daughter with a pain that felt physical, like an old wound that never healed right.
She'd read and reread Lily's last letter, words sharp as barbed wire, the hurt clear even between the lines. "You were always so busy with your horses, Mom. Sometimes I wondered if you ever saw me at all." Guilt weighed heavy, especially during the long, slow afternoons. The ranch was quiet now, only the sound of wind and the distant creak of old fences. Sometimes Eve spoke aloud, just to fill the silence. She told Shiloh stories about Mustangs she'd known, horses who had been broken but never beaten, and of Lily, who used to believe her mom could save any creature on earth. One afternoon, as sunlight danced across dust motes in the barn, Shiloh gave a soft, uncertain whinny. Eve stopped brushing and looked up, surprised. It was the first sound he'd made. Quiet, almost apologetic, but a sound nonetheless. Eve grinned, feeling years fall away. "Well now," she said, "that's music to my ears." She pulled her phone from her pocket, hands trembling with excitement, and snapped a picture of Shiloh's wary face. That night, she sat at her kitchen table and wrote another letter to Lily. "Dear Lily, it's slow going here, but Shiloh made his first sound today. Reminded me of the time you whistled for Daisy and she came running right through the creek. I keep hoping you'll come back, just for a visit. This old ranch is too quiet without you. I know I made mistakes, and I'm sorry. I hope you'll give me another chance, just like I'm giving Shiloh. Love, Mom." She sealed the letter, laying it beside the first on the kitchen table. Maybe one day she'd find the courage to send them. The weeks passed, marked by small triumphs and setbacks. Some days, Shiloh would nuzzle her hand or let her rub his forehead, and Eve would find herself blinking back tears. Other days, he would flinch at a sudden movement or refuse to let her near his feed bucket. Eve never raised her voice. She just waited, patience worn into her bones by a lifetime with wild things.
The work was hard. Her hands ached, her back stiffened, but Eve found herself growing lighter. The chores that once felt like burdens now gave her purpose. She began repairing broken boards on the fence, cleaning out the old tack room, hanging faded photographs of Lily and her father in the kitchen. Each act felt like a step towards something better. In the evenings, Eve would sit on the porch, watching the sun set behind the hills. Sometimes she caught sight of Shiloh grazing near the fence line, head up, ears alert, as if he too was remembering what it meant to belong somewhere. One quiet morning, Eve walked into the barn to find Shiloh waiting at the gate, ears pricked, a soft nicker greeting her. She felt hope flare in her chest. She reached out, and this time he pressed his muzzle to her palm with surprising gentleness. "You're coming back to life, aren't you?" she whispered, stroking his cheek. "Maybe we both are." That night, Eve took out a fresh sheet of paper, writing with new resolve. "Lily, Shiloh and I are making progress. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to build something better, with you, if you'll let me. Please come home." She sealed the letter and placed it on the pile. The moon rose, silver and hopeful, over the old ranch. Inside the barn, Shiloh slept soundly for the first time since he arrived. And in the darkness, Eve allowed herself to believe in second chances. Dawn crept over the Barrett ranch, touching the fields and fences with pale gold. For the first time in years, Eve Barrett woke with a feeling that bordered on hope instead of dread. She rolled out of bed, joints protesting, but her spirit lighter than the morning air. The past few weeks with Shiloh had been a slow lesson in patience, heartbreak, and wonder. A reminder that healing was a journey measured not by miles, but by moments. As she stepped into the yard, the chill of night clung to her skin. But there, by the paddock gate, stood Shiloh. He lifted his head, ears pricked, eyes alert. Gone was the wild, haunted look that had shadowed him when she brought him home. Though he still bore scars, some fresh, others faded, Shiloh's body now held the promise of new strength. Eve smiled and reached for the bucket of grain, whistling softly. Shiloh trotted up to her with a clumsy confidence, snorting as he nudged her arm. "All right, Greedy," she laughed. "I see you're feeling better."
She ran her hand down his neck, feeling the warmth of muscle beneath her fingers. It was a small miracle. Each day, Shiloh grew bolder. He explored the edges of the pasture, rolled in the soft spring mud, and even let Eve brush out the worst of his tangled mane. Sometimes he galloped for the sheer joy of movement, a blur of dun and silver under the blue Texas sky. Eve found herself lingering outside just to watch him, heart swelling with pride at every step he took. Restoring the ranch became her new obsession. The fences were a mess. Broken boards, sagging gates, nails rusted from too many lonely seasons. Eve dusted off her old toolbox and spent long hours repairing what she could. Her hands blistered but steady. She patched holes in the barn roof, swept out piles of old straw, and hung a faded sign at the entrance, "Barrett Ranch, Sanctuary for Mustangs." One afternoon, as she hammered a stubborn nail, a truck rattled up the drive. Eve set her jaw, bracing for trouble. But instead of a bill collector or nosy neighbor, it was Carla Jennings, head of the local animal welfare group. Carla stepped out, sunglasses perched atop her wild red hair, clipboard in hand. "Mornin', Eve. Word is you're workin' miracles with that Mustang of yours." Eve brushed dust from her jeans, a shy smile tugging at her lips. "Just doing what I can. He's still got a long way to go." Carla peeked into the paddock, whistling low. "He looks a lot better than the last time I saw him at auction. You ever think about letting the group use his story for the spring newsletter? Folks around here could use a little hope." Eve hesitated, glancing at Shiloh. Maybe. Let me think about it." By the end of the week, word had spread. Neighbors stopped by with curious eyes, some offering congratulations, others just watching, wary and skeptical. Eve heard whispers at the feed store and saw faces turn when she walked down Main Street. The story of Shiloh's rescue and slow recovery became a topic at the diner and the post office. Some folks called her brave. Others said she was throwing away good money on a lost cause. But not everyone judged. Old Mrs. Murphy brought over a sack of apples and a pie, telling Eve, "There's something about you, dear. Always knew you had the heart for this." A young ranch hand named Mason, who'd helped her late husband years ago, offered to mend fences in the evenings, refusing payment except for coffee and a slice of that pie.
Eve welcomed the help, but kept her circle small. She'd learned to trust slowly, the way Shiloh did. Still, the kindness warmed her more than she expected. One evening, as pink dusk settled on the hills, Eve walked out to the old family grave beneath the cottonwood trees. She knelt by the headstone marked "James Barrett, beloved husband and father," her hands resting on the cool stone. The silence pressed in, heavy and sweet with the scent of wildflowers. She bowed her head. "James, I know I messed things up with Lily. I let grief make me stubborn, but I'm trying. I'm trying to fix things, to make this place right again. For her, for me, for Shiloh." She drew a shaky breath. "I promise I won't give up. Not on family, not on these horses. I know you'd want me to keep fighting." The wind picked up, rustling the grass. Eve felt tears slip down her cheeks, but for once she didn't brush them away. She let the ache move through her, then rose, shoulders squared. As she walked back to the house, she heard laughter from the barn. Mason and Carla swapping stories, the sound mingling with Shiloh's soft nicker. Eve smiled, feeling something she hadn't felt in years, possibility. Inside, she poured herself a mug of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, pulling out her stack of letters to Lily. This time, she didn't hesitate. She picked up her pen and began again. "Lily, the ranch is coming back to life. So am I, in some ways. Shiloh's stronger every day, and I see so much of you in him. Fierce, brave, stubborn as hell. I wish you could see it. Maybe you'd understand why I fought so hard to save him, and why I'm fighting now to save us. Come home, honey, or just write. I miss you. Love, Mom." She sealed the letter and set it by the door. Outside, the moon rose over a pasture full of new grass and old hope. Shiloh galloped beneath the stars, free and wild, a living testament to the power of second chances. As spring deepened, the Barrett ranch pulsed with new life,
Wildflowers bloomed along the fence lines, and Shiloh, once little more than a shadow, now cantered across the paddock with his mane tossing, hooves churning up sprays of soft earth. For the first time in years, Eve felt the old pride returning, a sense that maybe, just maybe, her efforts would matter after all. But peace in a small Texas town was always fragile, especially when envy and old grudges lingered. Trouble, Eve knew from experience, never sent warning before it walked right through your door. It started one Monday morning when Eve returned from the hardware store, arms full of nails and wire for the west fence. She found the ranch's front gate standing wide open. Shiloh was nowhere in sight. Eve's heart stopped. Panic hit like a punch, but before she could cry out, a familiar nicker answered from behind the barn. Shiloh poked his head around the corner, calm and curious, grazing near the wild roses. Eve let out a shaky laugh. "Don't do that to me, boy." But as she closed the gate, she noticed the lock had been twisted, the latch left dangling. It wasn't the wind. Someone had tampered with it. That night, she double-checked every bolt and latch on the property. The next morning, the feed room was in shambles. Grain sacks slashed open, tools scattered across the floor. Someone had smashed the lantern and left muddy footprints in the sawdust. Eve knelt to clean the mess, her hands trembling with anger and fear. The air inside the barn felt colder than it should. By noon, rumors started swirling in town. At the post office, Eve overheard two ranchers whispering. "She's got no business keeping that Mustang. Heard she stole him right from Silver Rock's hands. That's what you get for messing with the wrong people." Eve tried to brush it off, but the words followed her home like burrs in her boots. She called Carla from the animal welfare group. "Someone's trying to scare me," she confessed, voice low. "I don't know if it's just kids or if Silver Rock's got a hand in it." Carla's voice was reassuring. "You want me to come by, Eve? I'll bring a camera, maybe set up some lights. That horse is safe with you. Don't let anyone make you believe different." But the pressure grew. That week, two strangers in a gleaming pickup truck pulled up at the end of Eve's drive. The driver, a broad-shouldered man with hard eyes, climbed out, arms crossed. "Name's Clayton Pierce. I'm the foreman at Silver Rock Ranch. Heard you've got one of our Mustangs. We've come to take him back." Eve stood her ground, meeting his gaze. "You sold Shiloh at public auction. I bought him fair and square. He's not yours anymore." Clayton's lips curled. "That horse never should have left our place. He's registered to Silver Rock. If you won't give him up, you'll be hearing from our lawyers. Town's already talking, Barrett. You really want to be the center of all this mess?" His companion, quiet, sharp-eyed, walked the fence line, peering at Shiloh as if sizing him up for a fight. Eve felt her anger rising, blood pounding in her ears. "If you step foot on my property again, I'll call the sheriff. Shiloh stays here." Clayton smirked. "We'll see about that." They left in a spray of gravel. Eve watched them go, dread coiling in her stomach. She could feel the weight of their threats, the way trouble clung to the edges of her life like a gathering storm. That night, a coyote howled close by, and Shiloh spooked, racing up and down the paddock. Eve sat with him for hours, stroking his neck, whispering comfort. "I'm not giving you up, no matter what they say. I made you a promise." In town, the rumors sharpened. A flyer appeared at the feed store. "Barrett stole Silver Rock's best. Ask her where that Mustang came from." Some neighbors who'd once smiled now crossed the street when they saw Eve coming. Supplies ordered for the ranch never showed up. Mason, the young ranch hand, found the fence near the creek trampled flat, fresh tire tracks leading off into the brush. Carla showed up with a camera, documenting the vandalism and the state of Shiloh's injuries, just in case. "You need to start a paper trail," she advised, "and keep every letter, every receipt. They're trying to scare you out." Eve nodded, exhaustion in her bones, but something stronger in her heart. She started a journal, recording every incident, every rumor, every kindness. She called the sheriff, who made a show of checking the locks and listening to her story, but she could see skepticism in his eyes. Through it all, Shiloh stayed close. Wherever Eve went, he followed, a silent shadow. At night, she'd find him standing just outside her window, head bowed, as if to say, "I'm here. You're not alone." One evening, as dusk fell and the barn filled with the scent of sweet hay and spring rain, Eve found herself writing again. "Lily, things are getting tough here. I won't lie to you, I'm scared sometimes, but I can't turn my back on Shiloh, not after what we've survived together. People are spreading stories, trying to ruin me. I wish I could tell you face to face, but I'll keep writing until you answer. I love you, and I won't give up on us." She set down her pen, the words a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. Outside, thunder grumbled on the horizon, and Eve steeled herself for whatever storm would come next. For the next several days, the Barrett Ranch was a place of nerves and shadows. Eve double-checked every lock before dusk and set her porch lights to burn through the night. She tried to keep herself busy, mending fences, brushing Shiloh, hauling water, but it was impossible to ignore the heaviness in her chest, the sense that at any moment the trouble circling her land might strike again. Then, one quiet morning, the sound of a car engine carried up the gravel drive. Eve looked up from her chores, heart hammering. No one ever came out this way unless they had a reason. She wiped her hands on her jeans and stepped into the sunlight, blinking against the glare as a dusty blue sedan rolled to a stop. The car door opened, and out stepped Lily. For a moment, time hung suspended. Her daughter looked older than Eve remembered, taller, her copper hair tied back in a ponytail, freckles across her nose, and a wary determination in her eyes. She wore a faded denim jacket and boots that looked too new for this ranch. Eve's breath caught. She wanted to run to Lily, wrap her in her arms, but the years between them pressed close, heavy and awkward. "Hi, Mom." Eve swallowed, unsure if her voice would work. "Lily, you came." Lily stood there, not quite smiling, hands buried deep in her pockets. "I got your letters, all of them." She looked away, gaze settling on the barn. "You weren't kidding about the trouble." Eve exhaled, relief mingling with guilt and longing. "It's been a mess. I never meant for any of this to touch you." Lily shook her head. "I came because you need help, and because I wanted to see for myself." She paused. "Shiloh, is he really as bad as you wrote?" Eve nodded, hope flaring in her chest. "He's a fighter. Come on, I'll show you." They walked to the paddock together, the silence between them brimming with all the things left unsaid. Shiloh stood near the gate, sunlight bright on his healing coat. He lifted his head at their approach, eyes wary but calm. Lily's breath caught. "Oh, Mom, he's beautiful and broken, but still here." Eve smiled, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "He reminds me of someone else I know." Lily glanced at her, a flicker of a smile breaking the tension. She reached out, letting Shiloh sniff her hand before gently stroking his muzzle. The Mustang leaned in, accepting the touch with a soft sigh. For a moment, Eve saw her daughter as a child again, fearless and kind.
Together, they cleaned the barn, filled water buckets, and repaired the sagging gate. The work was easy, familiar. As the day wore on, their conversation grew less guarded, each task a chance to rebuild trust. In the afternoon, Carla arrived, camera bag slung over her shoulder. She stopped short when she saw Lily. "So this is the famous daughter?" Carla grinned. "Glad you're here. We could use the help. Trouble's been brewing since the day Eve brought Shiloh home." Lily nodded, rolling up her sleeves. "I'll do what I can." As the sun dipped low, Mason joined them, bringing extra nails and wire. The four of them made quick work of the last broken fence, swapping stories and jokes. For the first time in a long time, the ranch echoed with laughter. But the tension in town hadn't faded. The next morning, a white envelope was tucked under the front gate. An official-looking letter from Silver Rock's attorney, threatening legal action and accusing Eve of theft and neglect. The words stung, but Eve handed the letter to Lily, who read it with narrowed eyes. "They're trying to scare you. We're not backing down." Lily's voice was steady. "You kept all the auction paperwork, right? The vet records?" Eve nodded. "Everything's in a folder in the kitchen." Lily took charge, organizing the documents and making a list of every incident, vandalism, rumors, threats. We'll need witness statements too. Carla, can you talk to your group? Maybe someone saw something." Carla agreed, her face fierce. They picked the wrong women to mess with. That afternoon, a reporter from the local paper called. Word of the conflict had spread. Eve's fight to save Shiloh had become the talk of the county. Reluctant but determined, Eve agreed to meet with the journalist, showing the evidence and letting her take photos of Shiloh's progress. The next day, the headline read, "Barrett Battles for Mustang's Future, a Story of Second Chances." Calls and emails poured in, some offering support, others still echoing doubt. But for every critic, there was a neighbor who remembered Eve's kindness, or a stranger inspired by her stubborn hope. Eve and Lily worked side by side, days bleeding into nights. They fixed fences, restocked the feed room, and filed a report with the sheriff. Eve watched her daughter move with purpose and pride, feeling their bond grow stronger with every chore, every shared smile. One evening, as thunderheads gathered on the horizon, Eve found Lily in the barn, stroking Shiloh's neck. "I'm glad you came back," Eve said softly. Lily didn't turn. "I'm not promising I'll stay forever, Mom, but I'm here now. We'll fight together." Eve nodded, her throat tight. She didn't need promises. The simple truth was enough. Outside, lightning flashed. The world felt dangerous, but also alive. As Eve and Lily locked up for the night, Shiloh pressed close to the gate, watching over them, a living reminder that some things, once broken, can still be made whole. Word spread fast in a small town. By the end of the week, everyone knew the Barrett Ranch wasn't just home to a battered Mustang and a stubborn woman. It had become a battlefield. Trucks began to slow as they passed Eve's long driveway, drivers craning to see if anything dramatic was about to happen. Some neighbors sent casseroles or kind words. Others just stared, waiting for the story to tip one way or the other. Inside the old farmhouse, Eve and Lily moved with nervous energy, prepping documents, checking the locks, going over every inch of fencing with Mason and Carla. The kitchen table was covered in paperwork, auction receipts, vet records, faded photos of Shiloh's scars, witness statements from anyone who'd seen or heard trouble near the ranch. Lily double-checked each file, her jaw set. "We have enough," she said, though her voice trembled with nerves and anger. "They're not taking him." It wasn't long before Silver Rock made their move. Late one muggy afternoon, a line of trucks rumbled up the driveway. At the front was a gleaming black pickup bearing the Silver Rock logo. Out stepped Clayton Pierce, broad-shouldered and stone-faced, flanked by two men and a woman in crisp shirts, all carrying manila folders. A sheriff's cruiser rolled in right behind them, local news van right behind the law. The showdown had drawn a crowd. Eve straightened her shoulders as the group approached. Lily stood at her side, hands shaking but eyes hard. Carla, Mason, and half a dozen animal welfare advocates waited by the fence, cell phones ready to record. Shiloh watched it all from inside the paddock, ears pinned, his body tense but proud. Clayton didn't bother with small talk. "We're here for the Mustang, Miss Barrett. You've got one chance to do the right thing." Eve met his gaze, her voice steady. "I rescued Shiloh from the auction, fair and square. I have all the paperwork. You don't own him anymore."
Clayton tossed a folder onto the hood of the sheriff's car. "These say otherwise. Transfer forms weren't completed properly. He's Silver Rock property, and you've caused us enough trouble." The sheriff, a thick-set man with tired eyes, lifted a hand. "Let's keep this civil, folks. We're here to make sure this doesn't get ugly." Carla stepped forward, holding a thick folder of her own. "We've got records of abuse, photos, vet reports, signed statements. If you're taking Shiloh, the world's going to know what you did to him." The woman from Silver Rock tried to push past, holding out papers for Eve to sign. "You can end this quietly, Miss Barrett. Don't make this worse on yourself." But Eve didn't move. Lily took the stack of forms, flipping through them, shaking her head. "These aren't valid. There's no court order, no sheriff's signature." The tension grew. Shiloh whinnied, pacing the fence line, his eyes rolling with anxiety. The crowd watched, some whispering, some filming. News cameras zoomed in, catching every word, every strained face. Suddenly, Clayton raised his voice. "You're not the only one who knows how to fight dirty, Barrett. Let us take the horse, or we'll see you in court. This isn't just about you. People are tired of your drama. This ranch used to mean something. Now look at it." Mason stepped in front of Eve and Lily, his fists clenched. "Back off. This is private property. You want to fight? You better come prepared." Carla stepped in front of the advocates, forming a loose wall at the gate. Their presence a shield. "We're not moving," she said, "not until the law says so." Shiloh, sensing the chaos, stopped pacing and planted himself square between the two groups, his battered body blocking the way, head high, eyes fixed on the Silver Rock crew. For a second, no one moved. The Mustang's courage was as loud as any shout. A crack of thunder rolled in the distance. The sheriff, aware of the news cameras, cleared his throat. "Enough. No horse is leaving this property tonight, not unless I see a court order. Miss Barrett, you have the right to defend your claim. Silver Rock, if you want to press charges, you do it the right way." Clayton glared, but the law was clear. "We'll be back," he growled. Lily, heart pounding, snapped photos of every face, every vehicle, every badge and logo. Eve put her hand on her daughter's shoulder, voice trembling but unbroken. "Thank you for standing with me." As the Silver Rock convoy pulled away, the tension lingered like humidity after a storm. Reporters rushed forward, shoving microphones toward Eve and Lily. Eve raised her voice, speaking not just for herself, but for Shiloh and every broken creature who'd never had a champion. "This ranch is a sanctuary," she said, "and we're not backing down. Not for threats, not for money, not for anyone. Shiloh's story is one of survival, and we'll fight for him as long as it takes." The story aired that night, footage of Shiloh standing guard making the lead segment on local news. Messages of support flooded in from all over the county and beyond. Some called Eve a hero, others called her a fool, but the battle lines were drawn. That night, Eve and Lily sat together on the porch, silent under the heavy summer sky. Shiloh grazed close, keeping watch. For the first time, the Barrett women felt the weight of family, flawed, stubborn, but stronger together. Inside, a stack of letters waited for Lily, proof that sometimes words can build a bridge over even the deepest silence. Tomorrow would bring more trouble, more fighting, but tonight belonged to them, a family reunited, a Mustang refusing to move, and a ranch that had become a symbol of hope. The Barrett Ranch woke the next morning under a haze of worry and anticipation. A gentle mist clung to the fields, as if the world was holding its breath. Eve sipped coffee on the porch, eyes tracing every fence line, every shadow, waiting for trouble, or maybe for hope. She didn't have to wait long. Before the sun fully burned off the dew, Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, clutching her phone. "Mom, you need to see this." She turned the screen so Eve could read. Comments, messages, even emails from strangers, some angry, many supportive. One post had gone viral, a photo of Shiloh standing protectively between Eve and the Silver Rock man, head high, scars and all. The image had struck a nerve. Hundreds of people from Texas and beyond were talking about animal cruelty, second chances, and what it means to stand up for the voiceless. Eve's eyes filled with something close to relief. Maybe we're not alone in this after all. But the real test came that afternoon. The sheriff's office called. Silver Rock was pressing charges, and a legal hearing would be held the next day. "They're coming for Shiloh again," Lily said quietly, looking at her mother with a mix of fear and resolve.
Eve's first instinct was panic, but Carla arrived with a plan. "We're going to fight this, Eve. We've got the vet records, photos, everything. The community's behind you now. I'll get as many people as I can to the hearing." They spent the next hours gathering evidence. Eve's kitchen became a war room,
folders stacked with documents, printouts of emails, a list of supporters and witnesses. Mason repaired the last of the storm-damaged fence, pausing only to add his own written statement to the growing file. Late in the day, as golden light slanted through the barn doors, the vet arrived. Dr. Granger, a stern woman with gentle hands, had cared for Mustangs all her life. She examined Shiloh, documenting every old scar and new bruise, every sign of abuse, and then nodded. "I'll testify myself. There's no question this horse was neglected before he ever set hoof on this ranch." By nightfall, the Barrett Ranch had become a gathering place. Cars lined the drive, neighbors and strangers alike arriving to offer support or simply to watch history unfold. Lily snapped photos for the case, capturing Shiloh's transformation, the weight he'd gained, the brightness in his eyes, the small ways he'd learned to trust. Inside, Eve found herself writing another letter to Lily, even though her daughter was only a room away. "Dear Lily, tomorrow might change everything, but I want you to know I'm proud of you, of us. No matter what happens in that courthouse, saving Shiloh was worth it. Maybe saving each other was too. Love, Mom." She left the letter on Lily's pillow, a peace offering in case the storm grew worse before it cleared. The day of the hearing arrived with restless energy. Eve and Lily dressed in their cleanest jeans and shirts, faces set with quiet determination. Carla drove them to the courthouse, Shiloh's vet records, photos, and written statements stacked in a banker's box between them. A crowd waited on the courthouse steps, reporters, animal advocates, even schoolchildren holding signs that read, "Protect Shiloh," and "Mustang Hearts Matter." Silver Rock's lawyer and Clayton glowered from the other side, but Eve saw the uncertainty in their eyes. The tide was turning. Inside, the courtroom filled quickly. Eve sat beside Lily, her hand trembling in her daughter's as the hearing began. Silver Rock's lawyer presented their case: transfer forms, claims of ownership, accusations that Eve had stolen their horse. It sounded rehearsed, brittle. Then Carla took the stand, followed by Dr. Granger, who described Shiloh's condition in detail, showing photos of his injuries and records of his rapid recovery under Eve's care. Mason spoke quietly but firmly about the sabotage, the threats, the way the ranch had changed since Shiloh arrived. But it was Lily's testimony that seemed to shift the room. She stood, voice shaking at first, but grew stronger as she spoke. "My mother saved Shiloh. She didn't just give him a second chance. She reminded this whole town what compassion looks like. I'm here because I believe in what she's doing. I believe in Shiloh, and I believe in second chances." The judge listened, brows drawn in thought. After an agonizing wait, the verdict was read. Ownership of Shiloh would remain with Eve Barrett, and Silver Rock's claims were dismissed. The judge condemned the cruelty Shiloh had suffered and praised the Barretts for their courage and determination. Outside, cheers erupted. News cameras flashed as the crowd surged around Eve, Lily, and Shiloh, who, sensing the excitement, let out a joyful whinny, trotting proudly at Eve's side. Carla hugged Eve so tightly she could barely breathe. Mason slapped the fence and whooped. Even the sheriff managed to smile. Reporters jostled for sound bites, but Eve's words came easily, raw with emotion. "We didn't do this alone. Shiloh's story belongs to everyone who ever believed in a second chance. Thank you." In the days that followed, the Barrett Ranch became a symbol of hope. The community started a petition demanding tougher laws against animal cruelty. Donations poured in for Shiloh's care. Local kids visited to meet the Mustang who'd stood up to the odds. Eve and Lily found themselves at the center of something bigger than either had ever imagined, bound not just by blood, but by the courage it took to fight for the helpless. As dusk settled, Eve leaned on the fence, watching Shiloh graze, Lily at her side. The land felt different, lighter. For the first time in a long time, Eve let herself believe the future might be bright. The air around the Barrett Ranch seemed changed after the hearing, as if the land itself breathed easier. Even the sky looked broader, the clouds drifting in lazy patterns above fields now dotted with wildflowers and the occasional flutter of a bluebird. The ranch had never been perfect. Paint still peeled from the barn, the fences were a patchwork of old and new, but it was full of life again and hope.
Eve found herself standing in the pasture more often, just watching Shiloh graze with his new herd. It started with 1 or 2 rescued Mustangs that the animal welfare group placed in her care, but soon there were more. Old, young, battered, or skittish, each with a story and a spirit that would not be crushed. The ranch, once silent and lonely, now hummed with the soft thunder of hooves, playful whinnies, and the easy laughter of people who believed in second chances. Mornings were busier than ever. Eve and Lily woke at dawn to feed the horses and check the fences. Mason arrived early, always quick with a joke or a helping hand, while Carla and her volunteers started organizing tours for local school kids. The old barn, once neglected and cobwebbed, had become a gathering place, full of hay bales for sitting, educational posters about Mustangs, and a big blackboard that read, "Every life has a lesson." It wasn't just about the horses anymore. People, especially young people, came to the ranch for more than animal care. Some were at-risk teens sent by the county. Others were kids struggling at school or home. They came shy and angry, wary like Shiloh had been, but the rhythm of chores and the patience of the animals coaxed them out of their shells. Eve saw herself in these children, tough on the outside, aching on the inside, desperate for a place to belong. Shiloh, once the most broken of them all, had become a living lesson in resilience. He let the kids brush his coat, led them carefully around the paddock, and stood still while they whispered their troubles into his ear. "He understands," one girl said, hugging his neck. "He's not scared anymore, so maybe I don't have to be." Eve smiled at that, feeling pride and humility mixed together. She had spent so long focused on her own pain, her grief for James, her guilt about Lily, that she'd nearly missed how much healing was possible when you opened your heart to others. Saving Shiloh had not just changed the horse, it had changed her. She often thought of the moments when she nearly gave up, when the barn was vandalized, when the threats from Silver Rock felt overwhelming, when old wounds between her and Lily seemed impossible to heal. But through each trial, something inside her held on, some scrap of stubborn hope that refused to die. On a crisp morning, Eve was invited to speak at a local school. She stood in front of a room full of fidgeting students, her hands shaking at first, but her voice steady as she began. She told them about Shiloh's journey, about mistakes and forgiveness, about how sometimes the things that break us can also make us stronger if we're brave enough to keep trying. One boy, eyes shadowed with the weight of his own troubles, raised his hand. "How do you know when it's time to give up?" he asked. Eve paused, then shook her head, voice gentle. "You don't," she said. "You just keep showing up. You try again tomorrow, and the day after that. Sometimes that's all it takes, a little more time, a little more kindness. You never know how close you are to turning things around." Her story didn't just stay in that classroom. Carla shared it at animal welfare conferences. Lily posted videos online that went viral, and soon families from all over were reaching out, some to visit, some to adopt, some just to say thank you for reminding them what real courage looked like. Lily, too, was changing. She laughed more, her anger faded, and she spoke with her mom every day, not just about ranch business, but about old memories, future plans, and what it meant to forgive. There were hard talks and apologies, but also new traditions. Friday night dinners on the porch, movie nights with Mason and the volunteers, letters written but now read aloud together. Eve realized with quiet wonder that the healing she'd wished for had finally come, not in a sudden miracle, but in the slow work of love, trust, and persistence. She and Lily rebuilt the ranch, yes, but they were also rebuilding each other. Their home was a sanctuary, not just for animals, but for anyone searching for hope.
As summer approached, new laws were being drafted across the state, inspired by Shiloh's story and the Barrett's fight. Lawmakers visited the ranch, reporters wrote profiles, and Shiloh's image appeared on posters calling for reform. The Mustang that once had nothing had become a symbol for everything worth saving. One evening, Eve watched the sunset from her favorite spot under the cottonwoods, Lily beside her, Shiloh grazing within reach. She closed her eyes, listening to the gentle sounds of home, and felt something she'd almost forgotten: peace. She leaned toward Lily, whispering, "I used to think I'd lost everything worth fighting for. Turns out I was just waiting for the next chance to do it right." Lily squeezed her hand. "You did, Mom. You really did." And in the fading light, with the horses running free and laughter drifting on the breeze, Eve believed it.
Years slipped by with the same quiet grace that turns storms to sunshine over the Texas hills. The Barrett Ranch, once scarred by loss and silence, bloomed into something almost unrecognizable, a living testament to forgiveness, courage, and the stubborn hope that comes from never giving up. Shiloh, the battered Mustang who'd started it all, now grazed peacefully in the upper pasture. His coat was glossy silver, his body strong, his eyes watchful but calm. He was no longer alone. The herd had grown, filling the fields with splashes of color and energy. Rescued Mustangs young and old, each with their own stories of survival. Every so often, one of the new horses would come to Shiloh looking for comfort or guidance, and he would nudge them with the quiet wisdom of one who had walked through fire and found grass on the other side. Eve watched them from her porch most mornings, mug in hand, content in ways she never thought she'd be again. The ranch had changed her, just as much as she had changed it. Where once her life had been narrowed by sorrow and regret, now it was filled with people. Children, volunteers, neighbors, travelers, drawn by the story of a Mustang and the family that refused to let him go. The house itself was brighter, patched and painted, laughter echoing down the halls. Photographs lined the walls. Lily at 16, grinning with hay in her hair. Mason on a wild colt. Carla and the animal welfare crew celebrating another successful rescue. And everywhere, Shiloh, by the fence, under the cottonwoods, his muzzle pressed to someone's outstretched hand. Eve hung up new pictures every year, but her favorite remained the one of Lily, herself, and Shiloh in the barn's wide doorway, the sun behind them and all of Silver Hollow laid out before their feet. Eve's days were busy but full. She gave talks at local schools and animal welfare meetings, telling Shiloh's story not as a tale of triumph, but as proof that patience and belief could remake the world. She taught riding lessons for nervous kids and heartbroken adults. She worked with counselors and teachers, turning the ranch into a sanctuary for not just Mustangs, but for families struggling with their own silent battles. Some afternoons, Eve would sit under the old cottonwoods with a notebook in her lap, jotting down the things she'd learned about forgiveness, about courage, about how sometimes the hardest thing was learning to ask for help. She wrote letters to friends she'd lost touch with, to her late husband James, and, though not as often now, to Lily, who no longer needed written bridges to find her way home. Lily, for her part, had grown into a force of her own. She took charge of the ranch's social media, posted videos of the Mustangs running free, organized adoption days, and answered hundreds of messages from people who saw something of themselves in Shiloh's story. She and Eve still had their hard days, old wounds, new disagreements, the push and pull of two stubborn souls. But now their love was a place they both chose to return to, again and again. The ranch's reputation spread far beyond Texas. Families drove cross-country to visit, reporters came to write follow-ups, and animal welfare groups asked Eve and Lily to share their lessons at conferences. The Barrett Ranch was no longer just a name. It had become a symbol, a living, breathing promise that the broken could heal and the lost could be found. One spring, the local high school held its graduation ceremony at the ranch.
Seniors in borrowed caps posed with the Mustangs, and the principal invited Eve to give the closing speech. She stood at the podium, voice steady, heart full, and told the story of Shiloh and of the years it took to find her way back to hope. "We don't get to choose what breaks us," she said, "but we do get to choose what we build from the pieces." That summer, a new law passed in Texas, inspired in part by Shiloh's journey and the community's fight. Tougher standards for animal welfare, stricter penalties for neglect and cruelty, and grants for rescue sanctuaries like the Barrett Ranch. Eve and Lily were invited to Austin for the signing, but Eve sent Lily instead. "It's your turn," she said, handing her daughter the old hat she'd worn to Shiloh's auction years before. "You're the future." And Lily wore that hat with pride, standing beside lawmakers and advocates, her mother's strength behind her and the Mustang's voices echoing in her heart. One golden evening, Eve walked the fence line alone, Shiloh at her side. He was older now, his gait slower, but his eyes just as wise. They reached the top of the hill, where the ranch spread out in a patchwork of fields and wildflowers. Eve leaned on the fence and breathed in the scent of grass and promise.
"You know," she murmured, "it's not about being unbroken. It's about living, about loving, fighting, and forgiving as many times as it takes." Shiloh nuzzled her arm, and Eve smiled, grateful for every scar that had led her here. As twilight deepened, families gathered at the barn for the evening feed. Children darted between the horses, laughter ringing in the dusk. Volunteers shared stories over coffee, and Lily called out to her mom, her voice warm and strong. The Barrett Ranch was full, not just with animals, but with second chances, forgiveness, and the quiet daily courage that remakes the world. Eve stood in the pasture as stars pricked the sky, Shiloh grazing beside her, and knew the truth at last. The heart of a Mustang is the heart of a survivor, and so is the heart of every family who finds the courage to forgive, heal, and begin again.